10 months after the death of Hugo Chavez, protests are escalating in Venezuela. His less charismatic successor, Nicolas Maduro, unable to contain a groundswell that started as student demonstrations 2 weeks ago and that has since spread amid anger against crime, inflation, and shortages on staple items like powdered milk, sugar, and toilet paper, all in the nation that sits on the world's largest oil reserves. Maduro has offered talks with the opposition, but he's also cracked down. At least 12 killed and dozens arrested, including one prominent opposition leader, Leopoldo Lopez. Chavez may be gone, but it's certainly too soon to write off Chavism, that fiery brand of left-wing politics that's still very popular among working-class Venezuelans who feel better off than they did a decade ago. Over the next hour, we're going to look at Venezuela and a South American continent where the left holds power in most places, but with money flowing back north to the U.S. economy, others, like neighboring Brazil and Argentina, are feeling the pinch. Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering, is it the end of Chavism? And with us to talk about it, Venezuelan opposition activist Paula OSORIO. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
He is the president emeritus of anti-globalization movement Attaque, Bernard CASSEN, of news website Les Mémoires de la Lutte. How would you translate that? The Memories of Struggles?
Yes.
The Memories of Struggles. Also with us, Raquel GARRIDO of the French Parti de Gauche, the Party of the Left. Thank you for being with us again here in the debate show. And political scientist Natalia BRANDLER. Also joining us from Caracas, correspondent Girish Gupta. We'll be checking in with Girish in just one moment. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. Our hashtag F24debate. Now, what started as a protest against the rape of the university student has indeed swelled. Those protests in Venezuela now into their third week, at least 13 killed, more than 500 arrests.
Traffic came to a halt in parts of Caracas as anti-government protesters burned rubbish and set up barricades on the capital's main roads.
This fight doesn't belong only to students. This isn't about government supporters or the opposition. It's about all of Venezuela, about everyone.
Protesters blame President Nicolas Maduro's socialist government for the country's high crime rate and economic troubles. The world's fifth largest oil producer is struggling with record inflation and chronic shortages of basic goods. Separately, hundreds of Chavistas, government supporters loyal to the late Hugo Chavez, held a mass motorbike rally in the capital. Addressing the crowd, President Maduro hit hard at the opposition.
No, it's not a protest. Venezuela is facing a fascist coup d'etat and a continued imperial aggression, which wants to put an end to the revolution and democracy.
Opposition leader Governor Enrique Capriles refused a meeting with Maduro billed as national dialogue. He says it's just a ploy by a government on its last legs.
I'm not going to a meeting with the Federal Council to help him save face. I'm not going to be like the orchestra on the Titanic. I'm not the musician. The boat is sinking. And I'm going to be the one playing the music? No, you're not going to use me.
Some opposition say talks are off the table until protest leader Leopoldo Lopez is released from jail and the turmoil ends. Trying his hand elsewhere, Maduro faced yet another rejection after students knocked back calls for a peace dialogue, saying it will do little to solve the crisis unless the government starts disarming gangs as a show of good faith.
All right, and we're going to try to get to our correspondent in Caracas, Girish Gupta. Girish, this Tuesday, more barricades?
Yeah, we're seeing lots of barricades. We're seeing all over Caracas, we're seeing barricades blocking the streets. It goes up and down in peaks and troughs. Yesterday was very serious and you couldn't really move around Caracas. Today it's a little bit quieter, there's only a few little things and seemingly less anger. But we have to remember this is not a protest about Caracas or even centred on Caracas. It's the whole country. Places like Táchira in the country's west, where the protest began. You mentioned the attempted rape of the girl that really sparked all of this. Táchira, Valencia, Merida, all over this country. We're seeing protests, and they're frankly much bigger and more violent and more cohesive, actually, in other parts of the country than they are in Caracas.
More cohesive, the peace offering that was made by the president, how's that gone down?
Well, this is right. Nicolas Maduro, the president, did make a peace offering to the opposition, and this has happened before. We always get every now and again, you know, that Hugo Chavez and Maduro himself, but very sorts of their rhetoric is very harsh and always has been. And now we have Enrique Capriles, the opposition leader. They're both talking about negotiations between them and some dialogue. Now, this seems wonderful, and it seems like this is a way of moving this country forward. However, you have to also remember that Nicolas Maduro called these protesters Nazi fascists the other day, and yesterday I was at a press conference that Capriles gave, and he said the world watching committing genocide. Now, it's very difficult to use the word genocide realistically as to what's going on in this country.
Let me ask you then, Paula OSORIO, should the opposition leaders be sitting down right now with the government, with the government of Nicolas Maduro?
Well, actually, I think that's a decision from the opposition leaders. It's not up to me to decide if they sit or not. If they don't think actually the conditions are there to sit down and dialogue, it is their decision. But I actually think it is impossible to sit on the same table with people that are just putting in prison and behind bars, especially students with legitimate concerns, and that are just asking for basic human rights, such as security in the universities, such as freedom of the press, and especially they're claiming just to stop the catastrophic management of the economy.
Raquel, GARRIDO, should those more than 500 arrests have been tabulated so far, should those people be let out of prison?
Well, first of all, I'd like to answer the first question regarding the peace offering and the negotiations. Venezuela, everyone should be reminded, has a very democratic institution. The Constitution was established by a Constituent Assembly, which is the most chemically pure way of actually drafting a constitution. I mean, it's way more democratic, for instance, than the French Constitution, which gives enormous powers to the president and has no sort of counterpower or possibility for the National Assembly or less the people to hold the president accountable. Venezuela has a revocation clauses, which means it's amazing for us in Europe. I mean, it would be crazy, and we would be very happy to have that in our constitutions. In Venezuela,
right, but any elected person, more than 500 people behind bars. Should those people be let out of jail? I
have maybe some, maybe others not. I mean, there's violence going on, illegitimate violence. It's a country where the democratic means of being in opposition exist. Actually, the opposition they obtained in 2004. The revocation referendum. They lost that election, but still they participated in the new means that the Constitution gave them, which we could have thought that then that they were accepting the new institutionality. Then they went on and losing elections, and because the last elections in December were very bad for the opposition, I think that's why the opposition today is turning back into a very putschist attitude, which is
Hang on, you say it's
2002.
Putschist, but when those protests began 2 weeks ago, these were peaceful student protests.
Some of them, maybe. Maybe there are some peaceful students. Although I was a student activist for as long as I was a student, and I had student claims. When you say you're a student, you have absolutely no student claim. You're talking about the economy. You're talking about freedom of the press, which is all in fine. I mean, there is freedom of the press in Venezuela. There are economical issues, obviously, and I think they should be dealt with in a democratic manner.
I actually think they're not like students and human claims, because the problem in Venezuela is that human rights are being violated. And I think, and I'm sorry to just tell you, you're wrong. You're wrong when you say that there's just violence that is isolated, because there are several videos showing the National Guards just putting like unarmed protesters into the ground and brutally just aggressing them. So I think that is not an isolated issue. And actually, the president yesterday just demanded an applause.
Don't you think that the opposition should turn to democratic manners of protesting? I mean, I'm in the opposition in France, for instance. I'm in the left opposition, but I'm in the opposition. I'm not calling for my people to take the streets in guns. So, I mean, don't you think that...
I'm not
either. Okay, fine, good. I'm happy to hear you say that, because in Venezuela, you have a very, very violent opposition. I'm not saying it's the whole of the opposition, but I mean, let's not be, naive. It exists.
Let me just bring back Girish Gupta. From what you've seen, you've been up close with the protesters. How violent have they been?
I've been up very close. I've been running through a tear gas and the Molotov cocktails and the stones that have been thrown in the streets just behind me, Plaza Altamira, for example, which is a real hotbed. It has been for years of opposition unrest. Yes, there are the opposition. I wouldn't describe the opposition as very violent. However, like all protests and these sort of rebel groups, I guess, you do get people who do want to come out for a bit of fun, whether it's for political gain or just for the thrill of getting in authorities' faces, getting in soldiers' faces, and running through that tear gas and hoping not to be hit. At the same time, the government itself, I think it has been fairly calm and collected in its response. Certainly behind me here, but there have been occasions when, as you mentioned, the videos, which, not all of these are verifiable, but there have been videos and there has been some evidence that they have gone too far. So both sides have an element. And now the government also is accused of having these pro-government militias, the guys who ride around on motorbikes and attack. That's a big fear for people in the opposition, maybe even more so than the real fear that exists. But basically, my point is that both sides are exaggerating. And yes, there are elements of danger and violence, but I don't think we can suggest that either side is particularly violent.
All right, a lot of reactions, very impassioned ones coming through from the viewers. Kello saying Venezuela's Maduro describes protesters as fascist coup seekers. Similar words as Yanukovych in Ukraine. Maduro's fate may be similar. Bernard CASSEN, your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with what Raquel said a moment ago. It's quite clear that there are good reasons for discontent in Venezuela. Everyone agrees, including the president of Venezuela. But there are manners, there are ways to show your discontent. And part of the opposition, not all of the opposition, the way they have taken, they have been violence, setting on fire public buildings, burning cars, vandalizing things, etc. So you cannot accept this way of behaving. In the last 2 years, there have been 4 elections in Venezuela. 4 elections which have all been won by the Chavista camp side. And the latest one was, as Raquel said, in December of last year, when the government parties won the municipal election by a wide margin, more than 10%. This is very clear. What some of the opposition want is regime change, which is not, they are not particularly interested on this or that. Of course, everyone is against violence, is against insecurity, etc. But what they want is change of the government. That is, they want to unseat a democratically elected president. And this is not acceptable.
Natalia Brandler?
Okay, there's so many things to say because there's very much has been said here. First of all, about your comments on the constitution and the democracy in Venezuela. Well, one thing is the constitution, and the other thing you must know is what governments do with the constitution. Venezuela has no independent powers. The judiciary follows the orders of Chavez that had before now Maduro's. There's no independent division of powers. Second, there's no free press. You must know they have changed. It's not untrue.
I've been to Venezuela. You turn your television on.
You cannot say that.
Tell me one channel.
When you turn your television on, all you see is
the majority of the media are privately owned.
In 116, like in the last
when you turn on your television in Venezuela, do you or don't you have criticism of the government? Yes or no?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
When you turn on your television in your house in Venezuela, Do you or
Maduro
don't you
Chavez
have
is not
criticism of the
talking?
government on private channels?
Today?
Yes, today. Do you or
have
don't you?
Very little.
No. No, you have lots of criticism.
Wait,
The majority of the media are privately
I'll let
owned.
you speak.
But do you know the Resorte law? The Resorte law is actually the law that enforces channels just to auto-censorship, and it is a liberticidal press.
They close.
So I'm sorry, but if they are private,
they
or
have
not,
closed
they
channels,
are not free.
And the last channel they have sold the channels to indirect business people who are very tied to the government. Their Capriles cannot go to any of these channels and give a speech or even a commentary. They caught him whenever he has to say something on TV. If they show there's not been one single footage in public television of the student march, just some acts of violence that are a tribute to the students.
But public television is a minority fact in Venezuela. The minority of the Hertzian and the cable television is public in Venezuela. The majority is private.
No, I'm sorry.
Yes,
that was long before.
It's
now
today.
it's public.
It's in private hands,
But
not
it doesn't matter.
private
It doesn't
hands.
matter in which hands it is. Actually, the problem it is
You
when
don't
it's
have
happening in
anybody
the
believe
country.
that there is no freedom of the press in
Because
Venezuela.
actually-
You just have to
when it's happening
switch
in
off
the
your
country,
TV sets.
it is very serious, and we're seeing it where through Twitter, which is even being censored because Twitter actually denounced that Caracas was censoring Twitter. So what else is what's happening in the TV stations today?
Leopoldo
we
Lopez.
are actually
Leopoldo
putting
Lopez
El
is
Chavo
actually
or
free
Mexican
in Venezuela.
soaps.
It's such a free country
right,
that people that
we're
effectively
gonna take a quick
participated in a
break.
coup are still running for
Raquel
elections.
Garrido, I'm going to have to
That wouldn't
interrupt you
happen
for
in
1
France.
second. Stay with us. Much more to come. You're watching the France 24 debate.